Your neighbor with the brand new SUV is broke. The woman down the street in the dented Honda is a millionaire. Same street, same paycheck, give or take. Let me explain. The neighbor's name is Clay, and every 3 years, a new Tahoe shows up in his driveway. Fresh paint, temporary tags, that smug little dealer plate frame. 4 houses down is Hannah, driving a 2013 Honda CR-V with a scuffed bumper and 190,000 miles on it. Clay has $8,000 of negative equity and a payment that'll outlive his patience. Hannah has a 7-figure net worth. So what does driving the same car for 10 years actually say about you? Spoiler, it's not "you're cheap." It's something more interesting and a little uncomfortable. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about why smart people make terrible money decisions. Hit subscribe because by the end, I'll show you the exact number Clay's little habit costs him by 65. I added it up twice. I didn't believe it the first time. Now, before we get into Clay and Hannah, let me reframe the question because the question itself is kind of a trap. When people ask what driving an old car says about you, they usually mean it as a quiet little insult. Like the car is a confession, like keeping a paid-off CR-V for a decade is the financial equivalent of wearing socks with sandals to a wedding, and I get it. We've been trained to read cars as status updates. New car says, "I'm doing great." Old car says, "I'm not." But that whole framing confuses two things that are completely different, and honestly, almost everything in your financial life comes down to whether you can tell them apart. Those two things are income and wealth. Income is what shows up, wealth is what stays, and the car in your driveway is the single most visible place on planet Earth where people mix the two up. So today we're going to run the actual numbers on Clay and Hannah, look at what the data says about who keeps their cars the longest, and figure out what that 10-year-old car is really telling the world. And I promise you, by the end, you'll look at your neighbor's driveway very differently. Let's start with the thing nobody wants to think about, because thinking about it ruins the new car smell. Depreciation. Here's the brutal truth. The moment Clay drives that Tahoe off the lot, it quietly sets a chunk of itself on fire. No flames, just gone. Then a new car loses about 20% of its value in the first year and roughly 60% by year 5. So Clay's $70,000 Tahoe is worth about 56 grand by the time he gets it home and somewhere near 28 by the time he's bored of it. That's $42,000 evaporated for the privilege of being the first guy to spill coffee in the cup holder. But here's the part almost nobody clocks. Depreciation is front-loaded. It's savage early, then it flattens out hard, which means the most expensive years to own a car are years 1 through 5, and the cheapest years per mile are years 6 through 15. The back half of a car's life is the bargain. So when Clay trades at year 3, he eats the worst of the depreciation, hands the cheap, reliable miles to a stranger, and then climbs right back onto the steep part of the curve. Over and over. I've got a name for this. I call it renting the curve. Clay isn't buying cars, he's renting the single most expensive stretch of the depreciation curve on a loop forever. And Hannah bought the whole curve once in 2013, and she's been living on the cheap end of it ever since. But the depreciation isn't even the part that should scare you. The payment is. So let me show you some math that genuinely changed how I look at a driveway. As of mid-2026, the average new car payment in America hit $800 a month. That's the average, not the fancy tier. More than 1 in 6 new car buyers are now paying over $1,000 a month for a car. And here's what Hannah understands that Clay doesn't. A car payment isn't just an expense, it's an anti-investment. It's the exact opposite of building wealth every single month. So watch what happens when you take that same $800 and instead of handing it to a lender, you invest it. By the time Clay signs for his second Tahoe, Hannah's brokerage account has quietly passed 70 grand. By his fourth, she's north of $250,000. He's got a slightly newer cup holder. She's got the kind of account balance where she can walk into her boss's office and not be afraid of the answer. And that number I promised you at the start, Clay's 3-year habit, run across his whole working life from 25 to 65, costs him just over $2 million. And that's the conservative version. Run it at the market's actual historical average, and it's closer to $5 million. So let me be crystal clear about what we just found. The choice was never new car versus old car. The choice is new car versus retiring a decade early. Clay didn't buy a Tahoe, he bought a nicer commute and quietly sold his future to pay for it. Now, I can hear the objection forming because it's the one everybody reaches for. But Nick, old cars break down. Hannah's going to get destroyed on repairs. And look, it sounds reasonable, which is exactly why it keeps people broke. So let's run it. Clay's payment of $800 a month is $9,600 a year, nearly 10 grand annually. So say Hannah has an absolutely nightmare year, the transmission mount goes $1,400 plus a wheel bearing. Call it a brutal $3,000 total. She's still nearly $6,000 ahead of Clay that year. And most years, she's not spending 3 grand. She's spending a couple hundred on an oil change and some tires and the occasional sensor that decides to throw a tantrum on the highway. The data backs this up too. When you look at the all-in cost of owning a car, repairs and maintenance are consistently the smallest controllable cost. The real killers are depreciation and interest, and a paid-off old car zeroes out one and collapses the other. So the repair argument isn't just wrong, it's backwards. The old car only feels expensive because the cost shows up all at once instead of getting quietly drained out of your account every month where you've trained yourself not to look. So if keeping your car is this obviously smart, why does it feel so weird to do it? Why does everyone around you keep trading in? Here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean slightly infuriating, because nobody, and I mean nobody, in the entire car buying machine makes a dime when you keep your car. Think about it. The dealer makes money when you buy. The finance office makes money on your loan. The lender makes money on your interest. The automaker needs you back on that lot every 3 years or the whole business model falls apart. There is not one person in that building whose paycheck improves when you say, you know what, my car runs great, I'll drive it another 5 years. Financially speaking, you are the villain in their story, and the whole system has been quietly engineered to get you to replace, not repair. The clearest evidence, the loans. Car loans used to be 3, maybe 4 years. Like today, the 84-month loan, that's a 7-year car loan, is at record levels. 7 years, people are signing up to pay for a car longer than most of their relationships last. Decoding traps like this one, by the way, is exactly the kind of breakdown I teach people to make, but more on that in a minute, because the genius of the long loan is that it lets the dealer sell you a monthly number instead of a price. And the second you start thinking in payments instead of prices, you've already lost. And it gets darker. Watch. When you stretch a loan that long, you spend years owing more on the car than it's actually worth. That's called being underwater, and right now it's at an all-time high. Nearly a third of people trading in a car owe more than it's worth, and on average, they're 7 grand in the hole. So here's the move the dealer makes, and honestly, it's a thing of dark beauty. Clay walks in, still owing $52,000 on a Tahoe that's currently worth $44,000. He's 8 grand in the hole before he even says hello. And the salesman, he doesn't flinch. He smiles, slides the paperwork across the desk, and says, "We'll just roll that into your new loan," and boom. Just like that, Clay is financing his old mistake on top of his new one. He's paying for a truck he doesn't even own anymore, wrapped inside a truck he can't actually afford. That right there is the machine. That's the perpetual payment trap fully assembled. And the only people who ever climb out of it are the ones who do the boring, unglamorous, deeply uncool thing. They pay the car off, and then, get this, they just keep driving it. Which brings us right back to Hannah and the real question. What does that actually say about her? Here's what that new Tahoe was really selling Clay, and it has almost nothing to do with transportation. It's selling a feeling. There's a thing in psychology called hedonic adaptation, and it's basically the reason you can't buy your way to lasting happiness. You get something new, you feel a spike of joy, and then your brain quietly resets that thing as the new normal. The fancy truck becomes just your truck. Researchers actually measured this with cars, and the finding is almost poetic. Within about 5 years of buying one, roughly a third of the happiness boost has already evaporated. So Clay chases a bigger hit, a newer truck, a louder badge. But here's the thing, the badge is really for. It's not for him, it's to be seen. Economists call this stuff Veblen goods, after a guy who pointed out a century ago that humans use spending the way a peacock uses feathers to signal. And a car is the purest signal we've got because, unlike your salary or your investment account, everybody can see it. So Clay's finance Tahoe is, in a very real sense, a costume. Money he doesn't have, spent to impress people he doesn't know, chasing a feeling that was always going to fade. And Hannah's dented CRV is the exact opposite. It's not a costume, it's a tell. It quietly says, here is a person who can wait, who can sit in mild discomfort at a red light and not care, who values what stays over what shows. Psychologists call that low time preference, which is just a fancy way of saying you'd rather be wealthy later than look wealthy now. And here's the kicker. That one trait, the ability to wait, is one of the strongest predictors of who actually builds wealth that we have ever found. The car isn't the cause, the car is the symptom. And if you think I'm romanticizing Hannah here, let's look at what wealthy people actually drive, because the data is almost funny. When researchers surveyed thousands of real millionaires, the most common cars they owned weren't Ferraris. They were Toyotas, Hondas, Fords. The list of top brands driven by millionaires reads like the parking lot at a Costco on a Saturday. Something like 60% of high-earning households don't even own a single luxury brand car. And then there's Warren Buffett, worth more than the GDP of small countries, who drove a Cadillac with hail damage on purpose because it was discounted. His own line is that he drives so little, buying a new car often would be pointless, and his daughter reportedly has to tell him when a car's gotten embarrassing before he'll even upgrade it. Now hold that next to the guy leasing a luxury SUV he refinances every 3 years, and the whole illusion just snaps into focus. The people who look rich and the people who are rich are very often not the same people. And the difference usually comes down to the exact choice we've been circling this entire time. One group buys the appearance of wealth, the other group quietly buys the real thing, one skipped car payment at a time. But I don't want to leave this as a spreadsheet, because the cost isn't just a number. Let me show you what renting the curve actually feels like, years down the road. It's Clay at 55. He's on his 9th or 10th new vehicle by now, and he's sitting at a red light when the dashboard lights up. Some warning he doesn't recognize. And his very first thought isn't, what's wrong with the car? It's, please, not now, there's still 3 years left on this loan. That's the feeling. It's a check engine light triggering a small wave of dread instead of a quick trip to the mechanic. It's doing quiet math at 2 a.m. about whether the payment, the insurance, and a repair can all survive the same month. It's being 55 and still making a car payment with no end in sight because there's always a new one waiting. Hannah doesn't have that light. When something breaks on the CRV, it's an annoyance, a Saturday. A few $100 from a fund she set aside exactly for this. It is not a threat to her entire month. That's the part the brochure never mentions. The new car doesn't buy you peace, the paid-off one does. Now, I'd be lying to you if I said keeping a car forever is always the right move, because it isn't, and I'm not trying to turn you into the person who drives a death trap just to win an argument. So let me be fair to the other side for a second. First, safety. Cars genuinely got safer over the last decade. Automatic emergency braking, the system that hits the brakes when you don't, has been shown to cut certain rear-end crashes roughly in half. If your car predates that tech, that's a real non-financial reason to think about an upgrade, because no amount of saved money matters if you're not around to spend it. Second, the reliability cliff is real on some makes. A 10-year-old Honda and a 10-year-old complicated luxury European thing are not the same bet. One's a workhorse, the other can turn into a money pit the second the warranty dies. Third, there's a genuine break-even point. When your repairs reliably start costing more per year than a sensible used car would cost you, And the things heading into the zone where the big, expensive failures live, replacing isn't weakness, it's just math. And if your income depends on your car, a contractor, a rideshare driver, somebody with no backup plan, then reliability isn't vanity, it's insurance. So, no, the answer isn't drive it till the wheels fall off no matter what. The answer is to make the call on the actual numbers instead of letting a guy in a tie with a clipboard make it for you. So here's what I really want you to take from all this. If you're sitting there right now, a little self-conscious about your older car, maybe parking it a row away from the nice cars at work, feeling like the dings and the faded paint say something bad about where you are in life, I need you to flip that completely. That car is not a sign you're behind. For a lot of people, it's the single clearest sign they're ahead. Every month you don't make a payment is a month you quietly voted for your future self over a stranger's opinion of you in traffic. And nobody's ever going to throw you a parade for it. The dealership doesn't mail you a thank you card for the Tahoe you didn't buy. The reward is invisible and it's enormous, and it shows up about 20 years later as a number in an account that hands you choices other people simply don't get to make. So, let me give you permission to do something quietly radical. You're allowed to keep the car that works. You're allowed to let Clay win the driveway and lose the decade. You're allowed to opt out of a game that was rigged against you the second you started thinking in monthly payments. And real quick, since we're on the subject of things that compound quietly while nobody's watching, that's actually the whole reason I built a school community where I teach people to make videos exactly like this one, breaking down the math, telling these stories, growing a faceless channel from zero, all of it. If watching this made the gears start turning and you've ever thought you could do this yourself, the link's down in the description. I'm in there and I'll walk you through it step by step. No pressure. It'll be there when you're ready. Now, back to your driveway. Because here's where we land. The 10-year-old car was never really the point. It's a window. It tells you whether someone is optimizing for how their life looks or how their life actually is. It tells you whether they can sit with a little discomfort now to buy a lot of freedom later. And it tells you whether they've understood the single most important idea in all of money, which is that wealth is not the stuff you can see. Wealth is the money you kept. So the car you didn't upgrade is weirdly one of the most honest things about you. It says you'd rather be free than look the part. It says you ran the numbers and trusted them over the marketing. Clay is still renting the Curve. Hannah owns hers outright. And 10 years from now, when her CRV is somehow still running and her account has quietly turned into something that changes her options in life, she's going to look back at every payment she didn't make and realize it was never about the car at all. It was about who she decided to be. So keep the car, invest the difference, and let everybody else keep renting their dopamine 3 years at a time. Quick reminder, I'm not a financial advisor, and this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Any results depend entirely on your own decisions and actions. Now, if this reframed how you see that car in your driveway, do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe for more of these, and I'll see you in the next one.